Hello techies, I'm Divya here. On behalf of CyberBrainer, don't you think the world of tech is evolving faster than ever? Now is the perfect time to dive in and build the skills that will take you places. With CyberBrainer, we are putting you in the driver's seat of your own future. We at CyberBrainer don't just teach your interest. We believe that knowledge is power, but it's applied knowledge that truly sets you apart. Whether you're diving into data science, mastering artificial intelligence, or exploring the world of cybersecurity, our courses are designed to give you the skills that matter. So let's jump into the session and make the future yours today. Thank you.
Let's get started. Talk about in terms of course structure. This particular course is known as the Advanced Reporting. Now, Workday has different categories of reporting trainings. And look at that in terms of the different report types that Workday offers and the capabilities. Each of these report types have. The first level is called Advanced Reporting. And then we also have something called Composite Reporting. And then there's finally something called Prism Analytics. Of course, not be talking about those aspects. But I'll still touch base and talk about what is covered as part of those. Let's start with reporting basics. Now, Workday has or does provide an inventory of standard reports. When we talk about reporting, in Workday, we can broadly categorize our reports as standard and custom as part of the product itself. Workday delivers a suite of reports across different product areas. We have reports in, for example, compensation space HCM, talent recruiting, payroll, and on and forth. Standard reports are part of Workday product, which means Workday's responsible for delivering those reports, but also managing those reports. Any changes, enhancements, modifications, upgrades, they're all taken care by Workday themselves. And then standard reports are of two types, report writer and espresso. Now, understanding standard reports is a good point to start learning Workday reporting. That's because once we understand the capability of standard reports, we can then present or provide solutions to our clients. Your client comes to you with a requirement saying that we need some XYZ report with XYZ data. Usually the first place to start your analysis is there a delivered report available? And if there is, then it's just directing your client to the report. That's why understanding the delivered reports makes your life easy. Now, how do you check standard reports in the tenant? This report available, and the report is called Workday Standard Reports. What do is I'll proxy as this super user, which is Logan McNeil. I'm sure you would have been introduced to this user. She has a lot of access, and that's why I'm going to use this user throughout this training. I'm proxied in as Logan McNeil. And I want to check all these standard reports in the tenant. There's this report, which is called Workday Standard Reports. And if you go to this report, it will list out all the reports. Now you can run this report by selecting a specific area. For example, I want to see all reports within compensation module. I can select that specific area and then it would list out all the reports in that area. Along with the report name, this would also give me a brief description of the report, the type of the report. Now, as we just saw, there are two types of reports. The first one is the report writer, and then we have Espresso. It lists out the type of that report, whether it is a report writer or Espresso. It also specifies whether we can schedule that report to run in the background. We can schedule reports to run on a recurring basis, maybe daily or weekly or hourly, or based on your requirement. And finally, it also identifies the domain within which this report access is encapsulated. If I need access to this report, I should have access to this domain. You can check whether a given user or users have access to this report or not by checking whether they have access to this domain. And at this point in time, what you can do is you want to see the report description would give you some details about what that report actually does. But you want to check. You can run that report and see the output. Now, this report wouldn't give me any data. And that's because this report, if I look at the description, it says, it allows me to view employees whose basic pay increased by an amount which is less than the statutory minimum. Now, this is a test tenant, and that's why I know there's no data for this report. But that's not relevant for us now. I just want to run this report, and I want to look at the layout. This is what it gives me. As I mentioned, it doesn't have any data at this point in time. Let's run one more report. This report I just executed, it's of type report writer. Now let's also run this report, and it says this is a report of type Espresso. Now it won't allow me or give me the option to run it directly from here. For an Espresso report, I don't get those options directly. Instead, what I'll do is I'll copy this. I have a new tab already opened, and I'll run this. I'll select some allowance plan, maybe car allowance. And I'll click. Now, what is the difference between a report of type report writer and a report of type Espresso? Before talking about that, I've already executed two reports. One is of type report writer and the second one is of type Espresso. Now, before I talk about the difference between these two reports, the second type of reports that we have in our tenant are the custom reports. Reports that you create in your tenant based on your client requirement. They supplement the delivered reports when a certain requirement cannot be handled by any of the standard reports. That's when you'll go ahead and create your custom reports. Obviously, you create them, and you as a client or you as the support team would go ahead and maintain these reports for your client. Now, all reports of type custom they are report writer reports. All custom reports that you create in your tenant, they are always of type report writer. Now, what it means is if I go back to my reports that I've run, because all custom reports are of type report writer, I can actually copy a standard report which is of type report writer and create my own custom version of it. However, we cannot copy a standard report of type Espresso now in any of these. Scenarios, we cannot modify a standard report. Your client sees this report and they say, this report looks perfect for us. But apart from all these fields, we also need the position of the employee. Now you cannot go ahead and directly modify this report. Now, what is the best thing you'll do? Or you'll go ahead and copy this report. create a custom version of it, and then in that custom version, you'll add position and you'll share that report with your client instead of creating a new report from scratch. The easier thing is you go ahead and copy a standard report and create a custom copy. As I mentioned, we cannot copy Espresso reports because this is a report of type report writer. What I can do is I can go to the related actions. This is a standard report. I can go ahead and copy it. I can go ahead and copy this. Workday shows me the same name and suffixes copy at the end. I can give it the same name or add some other description. I'll just add details. And I'll click on. Now this creates a custom report for me. And in here I can go ahead and make modifications. I want a new field to show position details or maybe any other information. I can now go ahead and modify this report. I can add those fields. I probably do not want this field. I can go ahead and remove it and on and forth. I can go ahead and make all the modifications. Once the modifications are done, I can go ahead and save it. And this has created me a new custom report. Only standard reports of type report writer can be copied. And you can create a custom version of it. Let's see what happens when I go to the Espresso report. Here I have this related actions icon. But when I click on it, if you see, this icon is not the related actions of the report. This is the related actions of this specific plan that you're seeing. This is a car allowance which is given to the employees in the company, and it gives me the details of this car allowance. As part of this allowance, my employees get 5% of the total basic salary as part of their car allowance. This is defined in compensation. When I go in here, if you see, there's no option to go ahead and edit, modify or copy the standard report. The options that I get are with respect to the allowance or the data that I'm seeing. All custom reports are of type report writer. And that's why we can go ahead and copy standard reports which are of type report writer. With respect to Espresso reports, we cannot see how those reports have been created. With respect to the report writer report, when I copied it, I could see the details of how that report was created. I can see the data source. I can see the associated business object. I can see the columns. I can see filter, criteria and everything. And then I can go ahead and modify it. But the Espresso report, we cannot see those details. Espresso reports are developed and maintained in Workday's developer language, which is Espresso, which is not available to us either to clients or to the implementation team or development team. And these reports are primarily used by Workday to develop reports, to deliver reports, for regulatory requirements, statutory requirements, audit reports and on and forth. Workday delivers these suites of Espresso reports. And we can just use them. They cannot be copied or modified, but they can be hidden. Talk about this, hiding standard reports. Now I have copied the standard report, created a custom version of it, and then completed the modifications based on the client requirement. When I go ahead and make this report available for my client, if you see, if my client searches for it shows both the standard report as the custom report I created. And this could be confusing for the client because we have enhance the standard report. We don't want that standard report to be available. In that case, we can also go ahead and hide these standard reports which are not to be seen by the client. Now, how do we do that? Just see that in a minute. Any questions? Now, Workday reporting is based on a self-service model. And what do we mean by self-service model? As a reporting consultant, your job would be to create standard, to create custom reports for your clients. Now, once the reports are created, you'll go ahead and share those reports with relevant security groups. You have created a report for managers, or you have created some report for your compensation administrators or your HR partners, or maybe your call center managers, on and forth. Once you create those reports, you go ahead and share those reports with the relevant security groups. Once the reports are shared, the reports are available to them either on their home landing page. Once the reports are shared, the reports are available to them either on their home page under all apps. I can make these reports available here on their homepage. There's some custom report which someone has created. Reporting for HCM. There's another. I can make these reports available here, or I can add those reports as part of a dashboard. For example, if I click on this dashboard is a collection of reports. I can make a report available standalone, individual reports, or I can add multiple reports together into a dashboard. Again, make it available to the client, or if I have access, I can directly search for that report. In my search bar, once the reports are created, each one of these is a report. My team's talent summary. This is a report. This is a report. Similarly, if I scroll down, we can group multiple reports together in order to create a dashboard. The idea is, once the report is created, it is shared with the relevant users. They can run the report whenever they need. You don't have to create reports. Run reports for users. Your users. Workday reporting is based on the self-service model in the sense reports are made available to the relevant users and they can run it, they can execute it, they can extract the data. Plus, if you have access, you can also download the report output. Once the report is executed, you have the option to download the report output. Let's see. As I mentioned, each one of those tabs that you saw on your dashboard, they were all individual reports. I can run this report whenever I want to. Plus, because I have access, I can go ahead and download it, export it to an Excel. Workday reporting works on this self-service model. In terms of custom reports, as we already discussed, all custom reports are created using the report writer tools. Either you can copy a delivered report and create your own custom report, or you can create custom reports from scratch in your tenant and look at that option as. Or there's a third option as Some reports are available as part of something called config packages. These are not standard reports. These are reports which Workday could have created. But they are not part of your standard reporting inventory. You can still import them and load them and use them in your tenant. There could still be some custom reports which were delivered either by Workday or one of their service partners, maybe KPMG, because it's a service partner of Workday. They have created some reports which Workday has made available to other clients as. These are the three ways in which you can create custom reports. Talk about these options in detail. One more thing. When you run this report, which is Workday standard reports, we saw that either I can select a specific report category and then it gives me all reports in that category. And there are quite a few report categories. I think there are some 200 all. When I want to get details of all the reports in here, or I want to see all the reports that Workday has delivered, one option is I select all of these categories and run them. Select it all. 21 categories, and when I click, will give me a list of all those 220, all our reports which are part of these categories. Across these categories, Workday has delivered 4,000 or close to 5,000 reports. Now, some of these reports you may not have access to. For example, in this tenant, we academic advising. This solution is not enabled. This solution is part of Workday student module. And we have not enabled Workday student module in this tenant. Maybe in your system you have not enabled Workday Finance, but still you can see a list of all the reports here, even if you don't have access to them, and you'll not be able to run them or get any data. But it will still list out all the reports here. Now the second way to get the full output, and see why I'm talking about this later. One option is either you select all the report categories and then run it, or the other option is you just leave it blank. Even if you don't select any report category, you keep it blank. Workday would still view all the reports. It still gives me the exact same reports. Now, why is this that this is the case? Talk about that when we create our custom report. This is a feature that you can configure for your custom reports and that's why I showed it to you. Look at that when we create our custom reports. Let's move to the next screen. Now, when you create your custom reports, there are different types of reports that you can create. Even the Workday delivered reports would fall in one of these categories. When you go to the task, Create Custom Report, you want to create a custom report from scratch. The task is Create Custom Report. When you go to this task, the first thing that you'll have to select is the report type. These are the types of report that you can create in the system. As part of this training, not talk about all the reports types in detail. As I mentioned, some of these are advanced reporting categories which are not in scope of this class, but still see what is each of these report types now. The type that you select for your report basically determines the layout of that report. If I go back and if I run the talent management dashboard once again, If you see different layouts for your reports, some of these reports have graphs, and others simply have rows and columns of data similar to how your worksheet looks. Your tables in an Excel. The layout of your report output is determined by the type of that report. The first report type is a simple report. Now, for any practical purposes, we do not create a simple report. The reason for that is the next category of reports that we have is an advanced. Now, advanced report, they basically provide all the features of simple reports, plus they give us more advanced features. Everything that you can achieve with a simple report can be achieved through an advanced report. Plus, it gives you a lot of advanced options. For example, when you create a simple report, you can only get data from one business object. What is a business object? I'll talk about that in detail in our subsequent slides. In a simple report, you can only get data from one object. However, in an advanced report, you can also fetch data from something called RBO-related business objects. Advanced report gives you a lot of advanced features. For example, you can configure advanced reports as worklets. When I looked at this dashboard, it is a collection of multiple reports. Each of these reports is called a worklet. What is a worklet? A worklet is simply a report that can be added to a dashboard. Your advanced reports, but also matrix and other report types. They can be enabled as worklets. Now that option is not available in simple reports. Plus, it gives you a lot of other options. For example, you can sub-level reporting. You can enable your advanced reports as a web service. What is a web service? Web services are reports that can be used in integrations to send data from Workday to third-party system and vice versa. For example, when I go back to my Create Custom Report screen, the default report type is simple, and this is the layout that I have the moment I change my report type to advanced. If you see, it's giving me some additional options. Your advanced reports can be enabled as a web service, which means they can feed into an integration, or your advanced reports can be used in an integration as a default data source. Now, that's not possible with a simple report. I have been working in reporting for 6 years now, and till date I have never created a simple report. You don't have to. For any practical requirements, we simply create an advanced report. The next report type is an advanced report. And talk about this in detail throughout this course. Then we have something called matrix reports. Now, matrix reports are the foundation of Workday's advanced analytics. How is a matrix report different from an advanced report? Matrix report gives you detailed data. I want to get a list of all employees in my supervisory organization, or let's say my call center, and for each of those employees, I want to see their date of birth, I want to see their job, I want to see their hire date, their salary, and on and forth. I can see this detailed data. Using an advanced report, the layout of an advanced report is that of rows and columns. This is how I see an advanced report. These are all detailed data. I see one column which is employee. I see another column which is certifications of those employees, and I see one row, or in certain cases, more than one row for each employee when the employee has more than one certification. An advanced report allows me to see detailed data, whereas a matrix report allows me to see summarized data. What is summarized data? I don't want to see those details. What I'm interested in is knowing how many employees are there in various cost centers. I am interested in getting those high-level numbers. That's when create matrix reports, which basically gives us those summarizations. For example, here it is giving me a count of talent pipeline for succession. It's not giving me details. It's telling me for directors. There are probably some 15 successors available with a succession timeline of 1 year. Matrix report gives us those summarized numbers. Again, there's another matrix report, which is giving me the number of workers with various competencies. It shows me there are 9 workers who have a competency of core value, and it also gives me what is the average those workers have achieved versus their target. Matrix reports forms the basis of your advanced analytics. Now you can also group your matrix reports to create your composite reports. Composite report is actually a combination of multiple sub-reports. We will not talk about composite reporting in this course because, as I mentioned, it's part of Workday's Advanced Reporting course. Now, this is where you can bring data from multiple sub-reports, one or many, and then you can apply advanced formatting options. For example, let's say in a cell or in a column you want to highlight those employees or those cost centers with the number of employees is, let's say, less than 5 or more than 100. Now, those kind of advanced formatting is not possible in English. Any of the other report types. It is not even possible to get data from different reports in any of the other report types. In composite report, you can group data from multiple sub-reports. Each sub-report can have its own data source. In addition to this, we have some other report types. Trending report is exactly similar or very similar to a matrix report. The difference is it has an additional time period element. While a matrix report gives me data as of now, it is this matrix report. It is giving me the current succession plan pipeline. Instead of this, I could have created a trending report if there is a Workday delivered data source to get me a succession pipeline over the last 6 months or last 3 years, let's say. I can build a report to show me the headcount trend, maybe the attrition trend, maybe the hire trend, determination trend of my employees in the last 1 year or 2 years or 6 months. Trending report allows me to analyze my data over a period of time. For example, how my headcount is changing, what is the attrition rate in my organization, and on and forth. Trending reports are similar to matrix reports. The only difference is, or there are just a couple of differences, and that is it has that additional time period component. Then we have a few other report types. The N-box report, it is primarily used in talent. If you see, this is an N-box report. It is showing me the performance versus potential of my employees. based on my potential. There are 4 employees whose potential is medium and whose performance is probably meets expectations. This is a 3 by 3 grid or a 9-box report. Similarly, there's one employee with a potential of high and a performance of meets expectation. An N-box report is primarily used in talent module. To get performance versus potential performance, or any of the other factors. Then we have another report type which is called N-box, search reports. Now search reports are again similar to your advanced reports, with a slight difference. This is a Workday delivery report, and let's look at that. The report is called Find Workers. This is a Workday delivery report, and again, people have created copies of it. Now, this report is slightly different when compared to an advanced report. Just an advanced report, it still gives me rows of data. There are 7,000 odd workers in my organization. And for each worker, it gives me one row of data with some additional data. Information. For each worker, it's giving me the worker name, the location of their worker, the country, their position, and probably their position. Now the difference is, in addition to giving me this, row of workers. There's also these options on the left-hand side. Now this is called faceted search. Now what it allows me to do is, it allows me to drill down the results based on the facets that are available here. Out of the 6,000 workers, there are 274 workers, for example, who are in the age group 31 to 40. Now if I select this, it will then list out those 274 workers for me. Now out of those 274 workers, for example, there are 15 workers which are part of this cost center. When I select a specific facet, every other facet, the numbers automatically align to it. What I mean by that is this 15 is out of these 274 workers who are in the age group 31 to 40. 15 workers belong to this cost center. Or out of those 274 workers, 245 are regular and 7 are full-time. If I go ahead and uncheck this, maybe if I select one more, now my count is 465, which is a collection of these two. And if you see the numbers here, change. Out of those 490 odd workers, there are 27 workers who belong to email, and now the numbers. This year changes vary. There are 4% who are regular. It's called a search report. Again, this is exactly or very similar to an advanced report, and we just have to define these faceted search. This is called a search report. And then we also have something called transport report. We spoke about this report called Workday Standard Reports, which lists out all the standard reports in the tenant. Now, similar to that, there is another report which is called All Custom Reports. This report gives me all the custom reports in the tenant. It comes with additional prompt options. I want to see all custom reports which are of type transposed. I could have selected any other search filter criteria. I could have selected all reports created by a specific owner with a specific data source. And there are a number of options available. Now I may not have access to all of these reports. Maybe some of these reports are not shared with me, but similar to the Workday standard reports. It will still list out all of these reports. It's just that I'll not be able to run them. For example, if you see, I don't have access to this report. Again, these are all test reports that people have created. There may not be any data in it. But still, because I don't have access to it, it's grayed out. But I have access to this report, which means the report is highlighted for me. And I can actually go ahead and run it. But irrespective of whether you have access or not, it will list out all the reports. Now again, this report is not accessible to everyone. The reason I can see all custom reports and I can run this report is because and when I say I Logan McNeil, the user I'm logged in as, she has this report writer and report administrator access. Because she has this access, she has access to Workday standard reports as is all custom reports. Now I can come in here and I can run it. Let's see if there is some relevant report available. Let's take this report. I am hoping it would have some data. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, finally. Thank you. It is Global Support Health Organization. Now this is how a transposed report looks now. In a traditional advanced report, we see on each row. For example, let's say I'm again trying to get employee details. each row would show me the details of one employee. My employee 1, probably column 1 would have the name of that employee. In column 2, it will show me, let's say, the age of that employee, the date of birth of that employee, and on and forth. Each row shows me data for one worker, and based on the number of workers, it shows me X number of rows. Now in transpose report, we basically interchange the rows and corresponding columns. If you see here, the layout is a bit different. The details of Jon Snow or the details of this cost center that we are looking. Or this could be a supervisory org or anything. It is showing me details over multiple rows. For each of these organizations, it is showing me a number of metrics. It is showing me the average age of employees in that organization, the average length of service, the headcount of employees in that organization, and on and forth. It is still giving me the same data, but instead of the traditional approach wherein when we show data for each object in a single row, with data being shown across multiple columns, in that row, the data is reversed. As I mentioned, the difference between each of these report types is how they present you that data. Any question? Look at some of these reports in detail, and that's when a lot of this would make much more. Or we have already looked at how do we copy a report, write a report, go to a standard report from the related actions of that standard report. We can go ahead and copy that report. We also spoke about hiding a standard report. And the reason you would want to do that is to basically eliminate confusion among your end users. You may have created a custom report and you don't want the standard report to show. You want your end users to run your custom report. Once you go ahead and hide your standard report, those reports are no longer available. Even if your end users have access to that standard report, they'll no longer be able to search for those reports. They'll not see that report in any of the Workday menus. They'll not see that report in any of the related actions. How do you hide your standard reports? This is just a simple task, which is called Hide Workday Delivered Reports. You can go to this task, select the report you want to hide. Or you can search for reports based on the report category, or you can directly go in here and it will list out all the reports. And then you can select the appropriate report, and then you can go ahead and hide them. And that's it. Thank you. If I'm in here, you want to hide report in a specific category, you can go to this option. It will list out all the report categories. Then you can click on that specific category. And once you say these reports are hidden, all your reports, standard reports, can be hidden. Now, in addition to the options we discussed for creating a custom report, we spoke about a couple of options. Option is I can go to a standard report and I can go ahead and copy it. The second option is I can also create a custom report from scratch. I can come in here, I can specify the report name, the report type, the data source, all the details. Click on and then go ahead and manually add the reports. But then to make the task of creating the reports easy, Workday provides us the option for contextual reporting. Now, this is helpful when the data for which you want to create a report. For example, let's say you want to build a report to see, let's say, some compensation details of the employee. Looking at this data, that this is what you want to pull into your report. You want to pull the compensation details of the employee. But then you don't know how to do that. You probably don't know what business object to be selected. You don't know how to pull this particular value into your report. In that case, contextual reporting can be helpful. Contextual reporting is used to create a report from the related actions of an object. It is used to create a report directly from the context of an object. In this case, you want to see or build a report from the context of a worker, or this could be any other business object. When would you use this option? When what data you want to pull into your report, but you're not sure how to pull that information because you're not aware in which objects, in which data sources that data is included. Now there are three options for contextual reporting. At this point in time, I can go to the related actions of my worker. If I scroll down, I have this option called reporting. If I come here, it gives me three options. It gives me an option to create a custom report from here. It gives me the option to view all the reports which are already built on this context, which have the worker data, and then you can also see the report fields. And let's look at the related reports. I think it will take a lot of time to run, but let's see. I'll also click on the other option, Create Custom Report from here. The first option, Create Custom Report from here. You can use this option to create a custom report using that object. When I say that object, you want to create a custom report for worker to show the worker data. When you do that, Workday automatically identifies what business object, what data source to use. Else you have to manually define. Find what data source you have to enter. And you should be knowing that if you create a custom report from this task. However, when you use the option Create Custom Report from here in contextual reporting, Workday, this is why I was not running it. It will keep running for 15-20 minutes because this is a very big business object. Workday automatically identifies the business object from the context. Workday identifies what data source is relevant for it. And then Workday defaults it for you. It makes that task of creating reports that much easy. The second option, if you see it, is giving me all the custom reports which are built on that business object. Now I can go in here and see on which data source these objects are created, what filters have been used, and on and forth. Related reports. This tool displays all the reports, both custom as work delivered, that are built on that object, in this case the employee or the worker. The third option is a report fields and values. Now you don't know in which field this data is. But this is the information you want to pull into your reports. Once again, you can go to the additional actions and you can select the option report fields and values. Again, I'll not run it because I know it will take at least 15-20 minutes to execute. The reason being, worker is a very big business object. It has lots of data, lots of fields. The Workday takes a lot of time to identify the context and fill this data, and plus, this is a test tenant. People have created all kinds of gibberish. If you see, there are all sorts of reports created. And that's why in this tenant it takes much longer. But if you have your tenants available, at least your company tenants, it would be much faster there. Your report fields and values. This option displays all the report fields as values that are part of that business object. That way you can see which field has this particular value. Contextual reporting is very helpful when you are starting on your reporting journey. You can see everything that has already been done. You can see data pre-filled for you, or you can create a report from your object itself. Any questions? All we have been talking about this object and this data source. For some time now, let's see what is a data source and what is this object that I keep. Repeating in your training last week, did you come across these terms data source or business object? Yes, no, maybe. Yes, we did. And if you have any questions, I see some. Messages on chat. Feel free to stop me, interrupt me, and ask your question. I'm not using two screens. I'll not be able to see your things and your chats every time. You can interrupt me and ask me. Ask your questions. What do you understand by business object? What? Do you understand by a data source? Anyone, that's fine. When you're creating In addition to knowing the report layout, basically knowing the report type, two most important aspects is understanding what business object you would use, and then within that business object, what data source you would use. What is a business object? Workday as is an object-oriented system, which means all data in Workday is defined in terms of an object. Or in Workday, we call them business objects. For example, when you see a worker in your system, Workday defines that as a business object. When you see a position, a job profile, a plan, a compensation grade, when you see supervisory organizations, when you see security groups, these are all business objects. Now, business objects are very similar to your database tables or your Excel worksheets. They are similar to your database tables and Excel worksheets in the sense you can visualize them as rows and columns of data. A business object consists of attributes or fields. For example, if I talk about worker as a business object, what do you think would be the attributes of a worker business object? If I talk about a business object called worker, what could be the attributes of a worker? Each worker would have a name. A first name, a last name. Each worker would have date of birth. They would have gender. They would have a job profile. They would be occupying some position. They would be reporting to some manager, and on and forth. If you see, these are all different attributes that define a specific worker. Talk about a worker, let's say EMP1. The first name of this worker is EMP1. His date of birth is 1990. Gender is male. Job profile is manager. Position is manager Workday. And this person reports to another manager called EMP2. Now we have this another worker who's EMP2. His first name is again EMP, born in probably 1960. Female, job profile is probably CEO. And this person doesn't report to any manager. Each of these are attributes that define a specific worker. Similarly, if I talk about position as a business object, now, what are some of the attributes that a position may have? Position would have a title. Position would have a status, whether it is open, whether it is active, whether it is occupied, whether it is closed. Position would have some effective date from which it is available. Each position would be associated with a supervisory org. Each position would be associated with some employee who's currently or previously occupying that position, and on and forth. For example, we have this position called Manager Workday. Its title is again Manager Workday, status is currently filled. It is effective from 2001. It is part of some ABC supervisory org and it is currently occupied by EMP1. Each object or each business object has some attributes. Now all business objects are Workday delivered. Workday has already given us all. these business objects, and it has also defined all these standard fields that are part of that business object. If I go to my tenant and I search for this business, this is still running, I'll close it. I go to this tenant and search for, let's say, business object called worker. Each business object is a collection of fields. These fields define the attributes of that business object. This business object is a collection of these fields. If I go to business object details, in Workday, it would list out all the fields that are part of that business object. This business object has. This is why it takes long. People create all sorts of data. Now these fields are either Workday delivered as part of the business object. Workday has delivered us a lot of standard fields. For example, worker, first name, last name, age, date of birth, gender. These are all Workday delivered fields. To that, we can create calculated fields as talk about those calculated fields or custom fields later. Each of these fields identifies an attribute of the business object. Then we have the instances of the business object. What is an instance? Each worker in your system is an instance of the worker business object. In my company, there are 10,000 employees. Each employee is an instance of the worker business object. There are 11,000 positions. Each position is an instance of the position business object. We see you can think of a business object in terms of its attributes and instances as a table. A business object is simply a table. Or you can visualize a business object as a table. Talk about this in a bit. The next is data source. Now, when we create our report, it asks us for a data source. What is a data source? A data source is simply a filter. Now, your organization has 10,000 workers, which means there are 10,000 instances of the worker's business object. You're building a report to see all workers in your US company. Or maybe you're building a report to see all active workers. Or probably all terminated workers. Now, out of these 10,000 workers, there are 500 workers who are terminated. You only need data for these 500 employees. You will select the relevant data source, which only gets you or gives you terminated employees. Data source acts as your filter on the report. Just your business objects. Data sources are Workday delivered. Each business object can have one or multiple data sources. Worker business object has a lot of data sources. Some business objects have zero data sources but the other way, Each data source is uniquely associated with a business object. If I come back and check my business object report, it shows me my business object has some 14,000 fields. And then, when I click on my data source, it shows me all the data sources which are available for this business object. As I mentioned, I want to create a report wherein I only want retiree details. I'll go ahead and select this data source. And this would only return me those workers who are retirees. Any questions? Now we have already spoken about fields. We already know that a report, a business object, is a collection of attributes or fields. Now, in Workday terms, they are known as CFS or class report fields. Each business object is a collection of fields. Workday has given us a lot of delivered fields. But then we can also create our own custom fields or calculated fields. And then we have also spoken about instances. The business object that we select, it determines what columns would be available on our report. When we are creating a report, if our report is based on the worker business object, it basically allows us to select all the fields or any of the fields which are available on this business object. If we are creating a report on position business object, it allows us to select the fields that are available on the position business object, the business object of our report. It basically determines what columns would be available on our report. The data source that we select, it basically determines how many rows of data report will return, because it acts as a filter out. Of those 10,000 employees in my organization, if I select the data source, all retirees, it will only return those employees who are retirees. If I select all active and terminated workers, it will only return those rows which are associated with workers who are either active or terminated. Your business object determines the rows or the fields that are available. The data source determines the instances or the rows that your report returns. Now, as I mentioned, each data source may have multiple data sources. This business object has some 57 data sources. These are all Workday delivered based on what data you want. For example, you want details of only active and terminated workers. You'll use this data source. You want details of all workers, including active, terminated, retirees, inactive. Then you use all workers instead of only active and terminated workers. This report gives you a description of the data source. As you can go through the description to understand what data that data source returns. Questions. When you are creating a custom report, can you select multiple data sources, or it's listed there, active and terminated? It has to be the combination of the two, has to be a data source. We can only select one data source. We cannot select multiple. If I want only terminated workers, I'll check. Is there a data source available which can only return me terminated workers? If there isn't any data source, which is the case, there's no data source which only returns you terminated workers. In that case, what you'll do is you'll select this data source and then build additional filters on your report to then only get the terminated data. Makes sense. But you cannot select more than one data sources on your report. Makes sense. Yes, thank you. When deciding what data source you want, go through the description of the data source. Talk about related business objects. Let's look at that. Now, as I mentioned, each data source is uniquely associated with a business object. When I come in here and I create this report, KP2, worker details, I'll select the report type and I'm seeing this is an advanced report. And then I'll select the data source. Now if you see, there's this checkbox called Optimize for Performance. What I'll do is I'll go to the next screen and come back to related business objects in a bit. This is something we have already discussed. At the top level, we have the business object. The business object defines the attributes, and then we have instances. The instances are determined by your data sources. And then we know we have class report fields. You can think of a business object as a table, a data source as a view in traditional relational database management system. For example, Oracle or those traditional database systems. We have tables, views, columns, and on and forth. An instance is a row of data. A class report field, basically, each field is a column. Now let's look at the report once again. When I'm creating my report, it's asking me to select the data source. You see, there's this checkbox called Optimized for Performance. If I come back to my business object and look at my data sources, you have something called the data source type. There are two types of data sources that Workday provides. We have standard data sources, and then we have indexed data sources. Now there's no difference when we select either of these data sources as to how we create our reports if we select an indexed data source or a standard data source. We create reports in exactly the same manner. The difference is that the indexed data sources are optimized for performance, which means your report would run much faster. It will be able to handle that much more data. Your indexed data sources are again Workday delivered, just standard data source. And when you are going through a requirement, see if there is an indexed data source available, which can take care of your requirement. If there is, build your report using an indexed data source. Now, there may not be an indexed data source available. Out of those 57 data sources, if you see, only 4 are indexed, only if there's no indexed data source available which can take care of your reporting requirement. That's when you'll You then go for a standard data source. Instead of going for that, all workers, you'll probably go for indexed all workers. Let's remove this filter. If I filter on all workers, there are two data sources. One is all workers and then there is an indexed data. All workers. Now, this is an indexed data source, and if I look at the description, this data source returns you all workers who are either currently active or who are active in the future. We have hired some worker effective 1st of Jan 2023. This data source will get you that worker details but it doesn't return you any terminated workers. If you're building a report wherein you need data for both active as well as terminated workers, then probably this data source is not relevant for you. Let's see, is this data source relevant? It allows you to access worker. And it returns you one row for each worker record. It includes all workers, even those workers who are hired in the future. And then it gives you some additional details. Talk about that later. Now, if you only have to build a report for active workers, then it is advisable that you use this one instead of this one, because this is an indexed data source, which means your report performance will be much better. We're going here, you see that. When I come in here, there's this checkbox called Optimized for Performance. And if I search for all active and terminated workers, it doesn't give me any results. And the reason for that is this is a standard data source. Currently, because this checkbox is enabled by default, it is only allowing us to select indexed data sources. It is only showing indexed data sources. You can uncheck this box to show all data sources. But when I uncheck it, it gives me a warning saying that it will allow you to select non-indexed data sources, which might cause your report to run slower. A very important criteria when you're building any reports is report performance. For now, I would select my standard data source. And I'll click now at any point in time. Once I have selected the data source and I have clicked because my data source is uniquely associated with a business object, my business object gets defaulted. Once my business object gets assigned, I can not go ahead and change the business object. Now this business object cannot be changed, but I can always go ahead and select a different data source. I realize this is not the data source for me. I should have selected an index. This icon identifies a standard data source. And this icon identifies an index data source. At any point in time I can change the data source. But now I can only select those data sources which are part of the worker business object. I can still go ahead and change my data source. I cannot change my business object. As I mentioned, based on the data source you select, your business object gets defaulted, and this becomes your primary business object. In the context of this report, Your worker is the business object or the PBO. What is PBO? The primary business object. In the context of this report, now your worker business object is the primary business. Now when we spoke about simple and advanced reports, if you remember, we mentioned in an advanced report, we can select data from multiple business objects. The worker is my primary business object, and from worker I can get any of the attributes. For example, I can get worker's first name. These are all the attributes which are available on the worker business object. I can select any of the attributes which are associated with this business object. And this is why we mentioned the business object determines what columns or fields would be available on your report. Similarly, I can get worker's age. I can get worker's date of birth, gender, on and on. Fourth, but I can also get data from a related business object. What do we mean by a related business object? If I go back to my Excel, if you see, here we have this instance of the worker MP1 who is occupying this position. Similarly, this instance of the worker business object EMP2 is occupying this position. Now this position in turn. Thank you. Now this position in turn manager Workday is an instance of the position business object. Similarly, CEO is an instance of the position business object with its own attributes. Attributes. It is. The title status is again filled. It is effective from 2000. It is part of some GMS supervisory org and currently MP2 is occupying it, and on and forth. This instance of the worker business object is associated with this instance of the position business object. Similarly, each of these workers may have additional attributes. For example, this worker has some compensation grade. They also have dependents. The compensation grade for this worker is, let's say, the compensation grade for this worker is CEO. Maybe for this worker, it is Vice President. This worker has 3 dependents. This worker maybe has 0 dependents or 5 dependents. Again, this is an instance of the compensation grade business object. If you see, there is this relationship between instances of different business objects. Some of these relationships are one-to-one. Some of these relationships are one-to-many. For example, each worker can only have one grade. One instance of the worker business object is related to one instance of the compensation grade business object. But when it comes to dependents, dependent name, the gender, dependent type, the associated employee, these are attributes of the dependent business object of the worker. Business object can be linked to multiple instances of the dependents. We have this dependent one who is some Smith gender. Male dependent type is son. and he is linked to employee 1. Similarly, there's a dependent 2 whose name is Jill. A female daughter, again dependent of employee 1. 2 instances or 3 instances of defendant business objects are linked to a single instance of employee business object. There exists this interrelationship between business objects. Now this interrelationship is Workday delivered. Going. If you see it, shows me. Worker business object can be linked to. When I come in here, I can see that a worker business object can be linked to. A worker can have one or multiple addresses. Similarly, a worker business object can be linked to benefit details. A worker can be linked to blood type. They can be linked to benefit plans and on and forth. Each worker can be linked to a calculated plan. A worker is associated with multiple instances of other business objects. Now, why is this relevant? When I'm creating my report, I can get data not just from my primary business object. But, for example, I want to get data for compensation grade. A compensation grade we know is linked to a worker. Each worker would have a compensation grade. I can go in here and also get details of the compensation grade in the context of this report. Now worker is my primary business object and compensation grade becomes my related business object. We were talking about the relationship between business objects. A business object can have one to many relationships with another business. For example, in this case, or at least in our report, the primary business object is worker or employee. That is our primary business object in the context of the report we are creating. Let's say I create another report where then I select my primary business object as position. Then that becomes my PDO. Any business object which is whose data source is used. That becomes our primary business object. Where is our report? In the context of this report, worker is our PPO. And then we can get all the fields from the worker. In addition to this, we can also get data from the related business objects. If you see, out of all these fields or all the attributes, the last name identifies the worker details. And then I can also get compensation grade of the worker. And I can also get dependence of the worker. While each worker is linked to only one compensation grade, any worker can only have one grade. It identifies a single relationship or one-to-one relationship. Any employee or any worker can only have. And this is the icon which identifies that one-to-one relationship. Any worker can only have one compensation grade. But a worker can have 0 or 1 or multiple dependents. which is basically a multi-instance relationship. Each worker can have one, or maybe zero to multiple dependents. This is a one-to-many relationships between business objects. How can I check that if you see a worker? If I'm looking at the worker business object or employee business object, it is linked to compensation grade. And each worker can only have one compensation grade. And we saw that this icon identifies this is a one-to-one relationship. If I go back to my business object, and if I'm looking at worker and I search for compensation grade, worker is related to composition grade. Similarly, each worker can be related to multiple dependents, which basically identifies a one-to-many relationship. Let's quickly go to our report. Thank you. Let's see how does that single relationship and multiple relationship look. This icon, it identifies that this is a one-to-one relationship. However, a worker can have multiple addresses. They can have multiple dependents. This tenant doesn't have any dependent data. That's why I'm not adding that field here. But it's the same case for addresses as a worker can have multiple addresses. Let's add this data and see how the layout looks. Each worker, Logan McNeil, has one compensation grade. This is a one-to-one relationship, but she has two addresses, one of which would be her home address, her work address, and on and forth. You will see there are more than one instances of addresses that this worker is related to. This is a multi-instance field and this is a single instance field, or this identifies a single relationship one-to-one. This identifies a one-to-many relationship. We have already spoken about the data sources. When building your report, the most critical aspect is your report performance. And when dealing with report performance, the most critical aspect is your data source. As we discussed first, start with an indexed data source. Now these are some of the examples of indexed data sources available on your worker business object. If there is an indexed data source available which can take care of your requirements, start with that. If there are no indexed data sources available, then Workday also, then you would go for a standard data source. Now within standard data sources, again check if there is a filtered data source available. Now talk about filtered data sources in more detail as we build our report. And then see if there is no filtered data source available. Check if there is any focused data source. Now what is a focused data source? For example, on the worker business object, there is a data source called my direct reports. Now this data source is used for creating reports. For let's say managers, you want to build a report for your managers in your system. And this would allow managers to basically see their team details. Let's say their name, their joining date, and maybe if they are on leave. If I use a focused data source called my direct reports for this report, if a manager is running this report, this data source acts as the filter, that it only returns those employees in that report who are reporting to that manager. If a person is not a manager, then it doesn't return any data. For example, if I come in here, it is currently giving me 7,000 records. That's because the data source I have selected is all active and terminated workers. Let us go ahead and change this. I edit this report. For each worker, I also want to see who is their manager. I'm adding another field called manager. And I'm also changing the data source. Source. We have this data source called direct reports. I'll use this data source. Now let's go ahead and run this report because I'm logged in as Logan McNeil. And I'm trying to run this report. The data source associated with this report is my direct reports. When I run this report, it will only give me those employees for whom I am the manager. It's only giving me 168 records, and these are all those employees for whom Logan McNeil is either direct manager. This is strange. I think at some point in time that could have changed, but that's fine. It's giving me those employees for whom Logan McNeil is the direct manager. All these are called focused data sources. Again, keep in mind what data you need, for which users you are developing your report. Point number 2, when you're selecting a data source, keep in mind or select that data source that gives you the minimum number of all the records that you need. For example, let's say you only want details of active employees. You can select this data source, all active employees, which will only give you details of employees who are active. Or instead of that, you could have selected all active and terminated workers. But then this will give you all the workers. When I say worker, worker is employee plus your contractors, your contingent workers. First, you don't need contingent workers. Second, you don't need terminated workers. This data source will give you all terminated workers. Plus, it will give you all contingent workers as your contractors. And then you'll have to build additional filters to then get you the data. If you see first, you're loading additional rows into your report context, which takes time, which impacts your report performance. And then you're building additional custom filters to then remove those extra records. And on top of that, all workers. This includes all active workers, terminated workers, inactive workers, retirees, and on and forth. You can build a report on any of these 3 data sources, but then based on your requirement. This is the most efficient report. Always keep in mind what data you need and based on that, decide what data source to select. All the data source determines the rows of data that your report returns. We have already been building our advanced report. I came to this task and I've already started creating my advanced report. As we discussed, an advanced report gives you rows and columns of data. You'll use this when you want to get data detail. For each worker, I want to see the compensation rate, their address, their age, and on. When I want to get this data dump, that's when I'll create an advanced report. Creating an advanced report. We have already seen, or for that matter, creating any report. You decide what data source to select based on your reporting requirement. And based on that, your business object gets defaulted. We have also discussed when creating a report, whether it is advanced or even some other report types. The data source, the business object that you select, it determines what fields would be available on your report. Because in our report, the primary business object we selected was worker. We can now get all attributes of worker or the fields that are defined on the worker business object. And there are some 14,000. They can all be fetched onto your report. And I've added a few of these. I've added a worker name. I have added manager. I've added compensation grade. I have added addresses and on and forth. All the fields which are available on your. This is a calculated field that someone has created. That's fine. All the fields that are available on the worker business object can be brought into your report. Your business object or your primary business object basically determines what columns or what fields are available on your report. Based on the primary business object you select, you can then bring all the related class report fields, but in addition to the primary business object. You can also get data above the related business objects, for example, for each of the dependents, or let's say for each of the addresses. I want to get additional information. We know that for each worker, address is a related business object. How do I know that? If I go in here and click on related business object, if I search for comp grade, if I search for address, if you see, these two are business objects that are related to worker. Now I want to see what address is. Attributes are available on address if I click here. Address in turn has some 206 attributes. Now for each of the address, let's say I want to get the address line 1. I want to get the address ID. I want to see the address effective date. I want to get these address additional attributes for each of these addresses. What I can do is I can also get details from the related business object. I can come in here. I want to get data, not just from my primary business object, which is worker. This worker is related to addresses, which means I can copy address and I can paste it here. Now when I click here, and if I go to all, if you see, I can now fetch all the fields that are available on the address business object. Address line 1, address line on and forth. All the fields from the related business object can also be brought onto my report. I want to get the address city, and maybe I want to get the address line 1 and on and forth. On a report, you can get data from your primary business object. And you can also get fields from your related business object. But for getting fields from your related business object, you'll have to specify the related business object here. And then it will allow you to select the fields. Now when I run this report, you'll have to specify the related business object. We know that this worker has two addresses, one 888 Broadway Street and this. And because we are getting data from that related business object, it gives me data on separate rows. Here it shows me the address, line 1, and for that address it shows me the city. And similarly for the second address, it gives me the address, line 1 and the city, and I could have added any additional fields as. This is how I can get data from my related business objects as. Any questions? Now, next, let's look at the field types. Now there are different types of fields that we can pull on our report. The first field type is text. What is text? As the name suggests, it is your plain text. If I go and edit my report, thank you. Let me add one more field. And here I'm searching for employee's first name. This is a field of type text identified by this icon T. If I go to the additional details, this is a calculated field. Don't worry about that. If you see, this is a Workday delivered field, which is of type text. Let's run this similarly. I'll add last name as. Again, field of type text. And there are other related fields, full name, for example, which will give me the full name in a single cell. Now if you see, it's giving me the same information as this field. The difference is this is a static text, which means I cannot do any related actions on this data. Similarly, what I see here, this is plain text. This is the first line of the address. When we select a text field, we cannot perform any actions on that field. It is static value. It is identified with the icon T. There are other field types as that you can add. We have numeric. As the name suggests, a numeric field is of type number, age of the employee. It is a numeric value. The length of service of the employee, again numeric value. We also have numeric field. Then we have data, the hire date of the employee, the termination date of the employee, the date of birth of the employee, all fields of type date. Let's edit. If I add age, a numeric field is identified by this hash icon. If I go to the additional details, this is a field of type numeric, a number. Similarly, I can add the hire date of the worker. Hire date is a field of type date identified by this calendar icon. It's a Workday delivered field of type date. We have date fields, numeric fields. Then we also have Boolean. What is Boolean? Boolean is either true or false. It will either return true, which is yes, or it will return blank, which is no, in Workday. For each worker, I want to check whether that person is a manager. There is a field called as manager. It's identified as a manager with this T/F true false icon. If I go in here, it is a Boolean. It basically identifies if the person is a manager. If the person is a manager, it will return yes. Yes, in Workday terms it relates. It corresponds to true. If the person is not a manager, it returns blank. Blank means false. When I run this report now, this is a numeric field, this is a date field, this is a Boolean, the person is. Betty Liu is a manager who in turn is reporting to me. Lillian Chu, she is not a manager. We have a Boolean date numeric. We also have currency fields. Now, currency fields are also numeric. But these currency fields have an additional component to it. Currency fields are similar to numeric fields, but in addition to the numeric value, a currency field also has the currency code. If my salary is the 100, it has two components. The first one is the numeric value, which is 100, and the second one is the currency in which I get my salary, which is USD. A numeric field, a currency field. If I add, I'm adding total base pay. A currency field is identified by this dollar icon. A currency field, as I mentioned, has a numeric value, a currency plus a currency code. If I add a currency field and if I go to value, options, you see I can show the currency symbol. However, if I go to a numeric field, and go to valid options, I don't have the option to show currency symbol. In either of these cases, I can do formatting. Age, I want to show with a couple of decimals. There are quite a few formatting options. I want to show 2 digits after my decimal. I can do that. Similarly for amount, maybe I want to show. For my amount, maybe I want to show 2 digits after the decimal. For age, I just want to show maybe 1 digit. I run this. You can see, for Jacqueline, her compensation is X and it is in terms of US dollars. All of these employees are US based, but their compensation is in USD. Employees do not have any compensation assigned, and that's why system shows bank. Now here I use the formatting option with 2 decimal places. Here it's just 1. Currency is similar to numeric with the additional currency value or the currency code associated with it. And then finally we have fields of type instance. We have already spoken about single instance. Single instance is one-to-one relationship. Each worker is associated with one compensation grade. Each worker has one manager. This is a single instance. This we saw as a multi-instance. Each worker has multiple, can have multiple addresses. Zero many. That identifies a multi-instance or one-to-many relationship. And then there's also something called self-referencing instance. What do we mean by that? Here, if you see, I have built my report on the worker business object, where then I'm again using the worker field. If I go back, my business object is worker and the field that I'm using is also. Now, if you look at this symbol, this identifies a self-referencing instance. What do I mean by that? It basically means this field identifies a specific worker of the worker business object. You can think of it this way. This identifies a specific instance of the worker business object. This identifies a specific instance of the worker business object. Basically, what it means is this field identifies a specific worker. There's no difference. It just says this field allows you to identify a specific worker of the worker business object. When you run this report, it will give you the worker details, basically the worker name, Each business object has a self-referencing instance. Similarly, if I build a report on position business object, I have to identify a specific position. There's a field called position. If I use that field, it will give me the position title. These are referred to as self-referencing instance. Similarly, if I go to address, there should be a self-referencing instance. If you see, on the address business object, there is a field called address, which is again a self-referencing instance. On the address business object, if you see, this is a self-referencing instance, which means it identifies a specific address among all the addresses which are created in the tenant. All again, it doesn't matter. We can simply go ahead and use them on our report. This is simply a categorization available. We have something called self-referencing instances, single and multi-instance, and then these real tips. Any questions? Now that we have looked at all the different types of fields, we've also added a few different fields. Let's go ahead and enhance our report. I'm going to modify my report. Let me go back to all active and terminated workers, that we have more records. I don't need first name because we have worker. For now, I don't need these currency symbols. I'm going to remove them. I don't need his manager. I don't need these details. That's fine. Run this report one more time, just to see our final layout output and then modify it. Now it's giving me because I've selected the data source all active and terminated workers. It is giving me all the rows. But out of all the active and terminated workers, let's say I only need those workers whose gender is, let's say, male or female. Now we don't have any such data source available. Obviously, we couldn't select a data source which is specific to a gender or which acts as a filter for gender, which means we will have to create those additional filters. I'll go ahead and edit my report. There is this tab called Filter. I can go to this tab and then define any additional filters I want. This tab has multiple columns. The first column of relevance for us is this one. My requirement I want to build. I want to restrict my report output based on the gender. I only want female employees to be listed. Field is basically the criteria on which we want to build our filter. In our case, the criteria is gender. I'll come in here. I'll search for gender. This is not relevant. It's some true, false calculated field that someone has created. I know this is the one. It identifies gender of the worker. Day. Whenever it returns multiple fields and there is a confusion, you can go to the additional information and see the description of that field. I want all those workers whose gender is male or female. Next, I'll come to the operator. The operator or the values that are returned would determine by the type of field you select. When I go to operator, it gives me a number of options. What is my requirement? All employees whose gender is the one that I have defined in the selection list here. Selection list were here. I'll now come here, and when I go in, it shows me all the gender values that are listed in the tenant. Again, this is a test tenant. People have created all sorts of data. If I want to select more than one values, I can go ahead and do that. Now this acts as an OR condition. This will give me all employees whose gender is the one that I have defined in this selection list, which is either male or female. If I run this report now, instead of some 7,000 rows it was giving me earlier, it should give me fewer rows. It's now giving me only 1,000 rows. Obviously, this is a test tenant. People hire a lot of employees and they don't maintain gender information for them. That's why there are just 1,000 employees who have gender, either male or female. I want to design some additional filters. I only want those employees whose hire date is, let's say, in 2022. I'll come back and now I can add some additional filters. I'll come in here, I'll edit. I want all those employees who are either male or female and those who are hired in the year 22. Click on plus. Now my next criteria is the hire date of the worker. I'll come to field. I'll search for hire date. Again, if we get a lot of fields, go through the description. Now, out of all these, I know these are not relevant because I can see that these are fields of type text. People would have created them as part of KLC fields. But I can simply discredit them because hire date cannot be text. Let's see what is this field. This is worker's hire date. Field of type date. I know this is the field. I'll select that. With respect to hire date, my requirement is all employees were hired in 2022. When I go in here, as we discussed, the operators are determined by the type of field. Because this was an instance field, you had the option in the selection list, not in the selection list, because this is a date field. When I go in here, my options are different. It shows as blank, not blank equal to greater than or equal to less than, and on and forth. I'll select greater than or equal to 1st of Jan 22. And once again hire date. Less than or equal to December 31st. Now it will give me all employees whose gender is either male or female and whose hire date is greater than this value and whose hire date is less than this value. Basically, any employee whose hire date is between this two date range. When I run this report now, earlier it gave me some 1,000 records. When the filter was only gendered, let's see how many records. Now it's giving me only 2 and if I go in, it should only give me those employees whose hire date is 22. All I want to add, my requirement is a bit different now. I want all those employees who are either male or female or who are hired in 2022. Earlier my requirement was all employee, all males, females hired in 2022. And my requirement is either the employee should be male or female. However, if the employee is male or female, is not male or female, then the hire date should be 2022. I'll come to filter because this is now an either or condition instead of saying and. I'll select or here. Either the employee's gender should be male or female, but if their gender is blank or anything else. If I come in here, you can see there are a lot of other gender options. Then they should be hired in the state range. Because they should be hired in the state range and there is an or condition, I'll go ahead and place brackets. Now Workday would return me results if this condition is true or this condition is true, the condition which is within brackets. Which means if I see any employee who is not from 2022, their gender would always be male or female because my requirement was either they should be male or female. Or female. If they are from these two genders, then they should only be hired in 2022. Based on that, now Workday has returned me results. Any questions? Now my results are 389 because now it's giving me employees in any date range, as long as they are male or female. If they are not males or female, then they should only be in year 2022. If I select 1st Jan 22 and see what values. Workday returns, you can see for those employees who are not male or female, their hire date would always be 2022. They could be blank or they are. Other options available, people will have created. Any questions? Now I have created is that no matter when we run this report, it will only give us values from that date range from Jan 22 till December 22. Even if I run this report next year in 2023 or 2024, it's still giving me data as of that end date, December 2022. No, I don't want that. What I want is, if I'm running this report on, let's say, today, then it should give me all employees hired from 1st of January 2022 as of today, if I'm running it. Tomorrow, then it should give me all employees hired from again Jan 22 as of tomorrow, or if I'm running it in 2023, then it should give me data as of that date. Now, how do we do that? If you see, Workday would have to dynamically determine the date as when it should return you results. Now, this is where that comparison type comes into picture. Now, we didn't do anything with the comparison type. We selected the field. We selected the option. And then we selected the comparison value. The value specified in this filter. Every time we are saying check this field using this operator that you have specified against the values in these filters, the corresponding filters. These are all static values. I'm comparing gender against male, female. I'm comparing this high date greater than the state. And on and forth. Now, instead of saying value specified in this filter, what I'll say is value from another field. Now, this is where I'll select the field as today. Now, today is a Workday delivered field, a type of type date, which always gives the system date. Now, basically, what I'm saying is get me all employees who are hired from 1st of Jan 2022 as of today. Whenever I'm running this report today would have that date and it will get me all employees. Employees hired as of that data. Now my report is much more flexible. It is not giving value for a static date range. It is dynamically determining the system date and getting me data as of that data. The comparison type is value from another field. Let's change this back to AND. We don't need OR because then it's giving us a lot of data. And I'm also removing this. Now when I run this report, let's do. That once again. It's getting me data as of today. How can I verify that? If the easiest way to debug something you want to know, what value is coming in today, what you can do is you can add today to your report output that allows you to quickly verify what data your report is getting compared against. That's a quick way to check how your comparisons are working. This report is still not perfect, or at least these filters are still not perfect. Because still, as an end user, if I'm running this report, I don't have the flexibility of deciding the date range. It is always giving me data from 1st of Jan 22 as of today. Let's say I want to run this report for 2019 or maybe 2016, a given month. Now I don't have that option because the filters are static, or at least I don't have the option to enter the values in these filters. Now, in order to let end users decide the date range, I can check the comparison type once again. A third comparison type, which is prompt the user for value. What I'm saying is for hire date. I'm not defining any default value or even any dynamic value For example, in the case of today, I want to prompt the end user to enter the value for this hire date, and the same is the case for this date ranges. Basically, I want the end users to be prompted with two dates: hire date starting, hire date ending, and let them decide for what date range they want to get data. And just one thing you have to keep in mind. If you are prompting the same field to the end user more than once, in this case we are prompting hire date, the end user more than once, one for the starting range, one for the ending range. The same field is being prompted to the end user. You have to, in the comparison value, you have to select non-unique values. Now, if you see the moment I selected from the user for value, Workday automatically defaulted something called default prompt. All I need to do is I have to come in here and select any of these fields available. Make sure that the fields of both these are not unique. If I don't do that, when I run this report, if you see work-based prompting just one hire date, what I expect is two hire dates to be prompted. In the first, I can select my starting range, and in the second, I can select my ending range. For that, you have to select. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter what you select in that comparison value, as long as they are non-unique. I'll come in here, go back to my filter. I'll select here. I'm saying this is starting prompt and this should be fine. When I run it, it will give me two prompts. But just for the sake of consistency, I would come in here and I'll select ending prompt. Again, it doesn't matter as long as what you select here is different from what you select here. And this is only if the same field is being prompted more than once. If I prompt gender, as for example, let's say I also want the end users to decide for what gender they. Here, I can still leave it as default prompt or I can leave it as starting prompt here. It doesn't matter if they are not unique because this is gender and this is hire data. Let's run this now. Now my gender gets prompted and I can come in here and select any of the genders. And I'm saying male my starting date and I want this to be run for 2021 till let's say May 30th, 2021. Now my end users have the option to decide for what values they want to run this report. And it will give me data based on what values they enter. At the top, it will show me my selection. It is giving me 113 rows. All employees are male. And they are hired within this date range. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel.